In this next video, I'm going to be taking the accessories off of the engine, like the power steering pump right here, and then the air conditioner compressor. All you got to do is just move them out of the way. Over here, we have the alternator. I'll be taking that off. And then the final thing that I'm going to take off back here is the starter. It might look all complicated and everything, but the reality is that all there is like a handful of bolts holding on the air conditioner compressor, and the power steering pump has like a few bolts holding it on. So if you could undo bolts, you can do this. It's just a matter of doing it is all, but it's all pretty easy. For the power steering pump, there's a wheel right here, and there's holes in the wheel. There's a bolt right here, and what you got to do is you got to line this hole up with that bolt so that you can get to it with a wrench. But to get this lined up to that bolt, I have a 21mm socket, and I'm going to go down to the main crankshaft right here of the engine, and you just put this onto the main crankshaft. You just pull on the thing, and then you can see the thing turning, and then it lines up with that bolt, and now I have access to that bolt, to that hole. Now I'm going to use a 14mm and loosen up the bolt, and then I'm going to loosen the one above it. With these right here, these are 12mm. And as far as this one right here goes, what you want to do, I have like a little mark right here. I'll take a picture of it. But whenever you take this thing off, what you could do is to keep the belt tension exactly the same. What you do is you just put it the same amount of turns that you unturned it when you took it out. And then once you take it out, you put a piece of tape that has the number of full turns that it took to get this out of there. So then you'll have the proper belt tension when you go to put the thing back in. I wrote down how many turns it took to get this bolt out of here. Mine just happened to be 35, but if somebody could put in the comments how many turns this was from the factory, because when I originally took this out, I never counted how many turns it was. So I just tensioned it myself. But I'd just like to know how many turns this is from the factory. And same thing with the alternator over there. I'm going to undo these right here. In order to make room for the power steering pump, you're going to need to remove this reservoir here and this bracket right there. It's just a 10mm. The next thing I'm going to do is put a towel down right here so the paint don't get scratched and stuff. And then what you want to do is get a piece of rope. I got some rope here. I'm going to feed it to this hole like that, and I put it out of the way. And then I'm going to pull the power steering pump off of here. I'm just going to feed this through this hole here. Tie all this up out of the way. And there we go. The next thing I'm going to be removing is this front sway bar right here. Okay, in order to take the sway bar off, the tools that you're going to need is a 12mm with some extensions to get to these bolts right here. And then this right here is a 5mm Allen wrench, and it fits into this hole right like that. and you're going to need a 14mm wrench for that bolt right there. But before you do all of this, what you want to do is, if there's rust and stuff on that bolt, what you want to do is use like either a toothbrush or wire brush or whatever. I'm just doing it a little bit. Mine's pretty clean. There's not that much rust on it, but and then if you can, or if you need to, use penetrating oil on here. There, that should be good enough. That is the WD-40 penetrant oil, and it has stuff that like eats away the rust or something in it like that also. Next, I'll do this side of the car. And there we go. We got the sway bar out of the car. I think what I'll do is I'll just go and put it into the trunk. With the power steering pump moved out of the way and the sway bar removed, I'm going to remove the air conditioner compressor. And there's like this little wire right here. What you got to do is just disconnect it back here. Like that. And then all there is just 1, 2, and then underneath there's 3 and 4 bolts, and they're 12mm. I'm going to do the top ones first. Now I'm going to do the lower bolts here from underneath. I've put a towel down right here because when you take this AC compressor out of here, you just kind of twist it and lower it down to the ground just to get it out of the way for when you take the engine out. You can, if you want, just get some rope and tie it up to something. The next thing that I'm going to do is the alternator here, and what you're going to need is a 14mm socket and a 12mm socket, and there are 2 electrical connectors here that you got to disconnect, and this bracket right here you have to remove at first from underneath, because the main bolt right here that holds the alternator on, it's a real long bolt and it won't slide out all the way if that bracket is in the way. So you have to get that bracket out of the way first. And then another thing that you might do, you can see how there's not a lot of clearance between this aluminum line and that electrical connector right there. You may want to disconnect it right here so you can kind of like lift the aluminum line out of the way. and get a wrench in there. It's a 12mm wrench, but I'm going to go underneath the car here. That's the bolt we need to remove first, because this bolt is the main bolt that goes to the alternator. It's really long, and when you go to take it out, it's just going to hit that bracket and you can't take it out, and then you can't really disconnect the alternator. So that's the first thing I'm going to do right there, is take that bracket off. It seems like the easiest way to get to this bracket bolt is from up above. And that's the bracket. Next, I'm going to disconnect the electrical connectors. Here, there's just a little push tab right there, and then it gives you access to the 12mm. And there's that one. That's disconnected. And then there's one more electrical connector down there that I have to disconnect. And there it is. I'll just stuff it up here for now. The next thing that I have to disconnect or loosen is this main bolt that holds the whole entire unit on. And you just get access to it from down here, and it's a 14mm. It's loosened up, and I'll loosen this one up while I'm at it. And that is tight. There we go. That's loosened up now. And then I'm gonna loosen this bolt up right here, and that's a 12mm. And for this one right here, what I've done is I put a little black mark on here. I'll take a picture of it, but I got that mark on there, and I'm just gonna count how many turns it takes to get this thing out of there. What I'll do is I'll just get a piece of tape and put it on here and write down how many turns that it took to get out. So when I go to put it back in, I'll put it in the same amount of turns, and then I have the proper tension for the belt. Well, it took me 45 turns to get this out of there. So I'm just going to put this back in here temporarily. But if anybody else out there can tell me how many turns it is from the factory settings, so I don't know how many turns that the factory had that turned in for the proper belt tension. I took mine out and didn't count how many turns it was. If you could just go ahead and put that in the comments if you find out yourself, I'd really like to know. Thanks. But everything here is loose. I'll just undo the belt here and then just start taking this bracket off. And there's the bottom bolt. And in theory, this thing should just go ahead and slide on out. And there we go. That's my alternator. I cleaned it off whenever I put it in last time, so it's all shiny. I polished it on the buffer. The next thing I'm going to remove is the starter. And in the manual it says that there's an order of removal of the electrical wires. And it says that there's an order of removal of the bolts. And same thing with like the installation. But I'm going to disconnect this first right here. This just goes to the oil sensor. So I'm just getting this out of the way so that we don't confuse anything. But there's like this smaller electrical connector that goes to the starter, and that's the one that you want to remove first. This one right here. And then the next electrical connector you want to remove is the larger one, and that takes a 12mm. Okay, the next thing, now that we got the wires out of the way, is the bolts that hold on the starter. Whenever you install this, it says that you have to temporarily put this bolt in and then tighten these two outside bolts. Then go back to this one and do a final torquing of this one. So that's the order of installation. So this bottom bolt right here, that's a 14 millimeter, and these other ones right here and here, you have to get them from underneath the car, and you got to use extensions. And in order to get this bolt out right here from underneath the car, there's this electrical wire that goes down along the transmission. You have to disconnect the bracket and move the wire out of the way. So that's what I'm going to do, is I'm going to loosen these two outside bolts first. I'm going to do this one down there on the bottom because it's a 14 millimeter and I could do it from this side. Then I'm going to go to the back side and then unloosen this. And then I'll finally take this one out at the end. This bottom bolt to the alternator is on there so tight, I had to put a 12 millimeter wrench on the other side, and I'm holding everything from the top here, and I just need leverage to undo this. There we go. Oh well. In order to get to the other two bolts of the starter, you have to get underneath the car here and access it from underneath. Okay, here we are. I'm just going to do this one first. That's over here. Next, there's this wire right here. It's in the way of getting to one of the bolts, so you just have to remove this with a 10 millimeter socket right there. Okay, now what I've done is I've removed this electrical line out of the way. So now I'm going to have access to this bolt up here. Looks like I'm going to have to use a bunch of different extensions here to even get any leverage on that thing. And I'll use my larger ratcheting wrench. I'm holding up the starter right now through the wheel well area. There. And finally, I got this bolt. This is a major accomplishment for me. There, I just removed the bolts from underneath, and there's the starter. It slid out.